Hey guys, how you doing? This is the first video that I've ever done, so might be a lot of glitches in this. Bear with me, but I wanted to give a brief overview of the chapter that you're going to be reading about in distance learning this week, which is chapter 23, the Great Depression, in the Brinkley textbook. It starts on page 639. When you go into Infinite Campus this week, make sure that you find the questions for this chapter. You only have one of three questions on page 639 to do, and then at the end of the chapter, recall and reflect on 660. You answer all of those and get those into me by the due date, which is in Infinite Campus. I've also uploaded copies of my notes for all of you to look at, and then there are also the vocabulary words uploaded that are completely filled out. All you have to do for me this week, read the chapter, answer the questions. We have the audio chat on Thursday, which is going to be over FDR's first inaugural address. That's uploaded in IC and on Teams. And then we have the discussion board question as well. So chapter 23 is the Great Depression. Great Depression is the longest and the worst financial calamity that ever happened to the United States, and it lasts from pretty much 1929 to 1941-42. It takes World War II to get us out of the Great Depression. It happens because of a couple of reasons. The short reason is the stock market crashes, but there are underlying reasons for the Great Depression besides the stock market. So what's interesting about the Depression is the fact that it lasted so long and then it was so severe. So the stock market crashes on October 29th, 1929. That day is referred to as Black Tuesday. We've got 16 million shares of stock traded on that one day. To give you an idea of how large that is, a normal day for the stock market in 1929 traded about 4 million shares. So we've got 16 million shares sold in a day. That sends the prices down, and the stock market does not come back from that. You could see some parallels to what's happening right now with coronavirus in the stock market, but the stock market is recovering now. Besides the stock market, the U.S. pretty much relied on two industries, auto and construction. And those industries took a hit towards the late 1920s, early 30s, and as a result of that, that's another reason for the Depression, is the over-reliance on just two industries, car and housing. People weren't buying enough goods. Businesses were producing too much. There wasn't enough demand. Credit was easy to get. Farmers were in massive debt because they'd invested in machinery for their farms, and in the 20s, prices kept going down. That's another reason. We have declining American exports. Another big piece to the Depression is so many people are not making enough money. We have a lot of people not making any money. We have very few people making a lot of money. It's called maldistribution of wealth. We have that still today. But when the people who are already not making enough money start getting laid off and losing their jobs, that just intensifies the Depression. What you're going to see as you read in the chapter, under the coming of the Great Depression on 640, on 643, the American people in hard times. We've got industrial centers, cities in the United States that have massive unemployment. Unemployment at its peak in Toledo, Ohio, for instance, was 80%. That means 4 of 5 people in Toledo, Ohio are unemployed, 4 of 5 working Americans. We've got the Dust Bowl happening in the Midwest and farms because of intense drought. Farm prices are low. We've got teenagers riding on trains because their parents can no longer afford to have them at home. So all of this stuff is happening. The birth rate goes down. People stay married rather than getting divorced because they can't afford it. So there's a lot of social problems going on. African Americans are especially hard hit by the Depression because whites begin to take those jobs that primarily they hadn't wanted before, that were that were seen as jobs for African Americans, now whites want those jobs. There's intense racism in our society. You'll read about the Scottsboro Boys in this chapter as well. Women actually, by the end of the Depression, a stat in our text is that 20% more women are in the workforce at the end of the Depression than were in the workforce at the beginning. But one thing that does happen with women is professional opportunities for women decline. Even though there may be more women in the workforce, the good paying jobs are left primarily for men, and a lot of women were not encouraged to work, or it was said, let men get those jobs. There's some stuff on culture in this chapter on the Great Depression, where it's going to talk about the radio and movies. Even though people were suffering financially, economically, they were going to the movies. You'll see that on 651. And then starting on page 655, you're going to read a little bit about Herbert Hoover. It's called The Unhappy Presidency of Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover is president from 1929 to 1933. He was looked at, he had been in charge of the Food Administration during World War I. A lot of people were excited about Herbert Hoover being president, and he happened to be president during the worst economic downturn in American history, and he's blamed for it. It's not Hoover's fault, but he did not do enough to try to get the United States out of the Depression. So Hoover doesn't respond as he should. When he does try to respond, it's not enough. There's something started called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which was supposed to help businesses out. It only gives money to big banks. It doesn't spend all the money it has. There's the Bonus Army, which is a group of World War I veterans that wants an immediate payment of a pension that's due to them in 1945. They protest in Washington. Hoover sends the army in to break up those protests. And in 1932, Hoover runs against Franklin Roosevelt, who had been governor of New York. And Roosevelt is going to go on to be elected 4 different times before he dies in 1945. He's kind of vague in what he wants for the American people. He just promises them a, quote, New Deal. He doesn't say what that is, but that turns into the New Deal of the 30s, which is massive government assistance and establishing programs to try to help the United States get out of the Depression, which the New Deal didn't do. So that's chapter 23 in about an 8-minute nutshell. Please email me or chat on Teams if you have questions. Take care of yourself, be safe, and I'll talk to you guys soon.